Let's go. Hi there, everyone. Today, Catherine and I are going to talk about settings and navigation. So, Catherine, do you want to kick it off?
Yes, I do. Okay, so I think the first thing that I want to talk about, there are two things today. So, some proposed IA changes that have been coming out of various research studies that have been conducted over the past couple of milestones, and then also just some patterns I'm observing in the content as I go through and audit the content. So, I'll start with um, sharing my screen and taking a look at the spreadsheet that I've got here, and I'll give some context that some of these things are potential explorations and some of these things are things that are recommended based off of the research. So basically what I started with is some of the findings that came out of the study that was specific to operations, navigation items. And so this is just where I'm collecting all the different points that were made. So the first one we have is moving the Kubernetes, Terraform, and serverless into a new item called infrastructure. So that came out of the first click testing that occurred with operation items, but also in a recent card sort that is currently in progress. We see that these items are being grouped together as well by the majority of participants, also with the name infrastructure or some similar things. So feeling pretty confident about that move. Um, then the next one is moving releases, feature flags, A/B tests. I don't know if that item is in the nav yet, but that was included in that test. And environments to a new item called deployments. So this was something also from that operations first click test. And just an idea to move those out of operations where they currently exist into a new menu item. And oh, that is not the next one I would talk about. The next one that I would like to talk about related to that is potentially renaming operations to monitoring or observability. Because if you take a look at the items under operations, this is not the full list. It's so tricky sometimes because it all depends on what you have enabled in your project. Anyway, but if you look at some of the items included under operations, if we move out the things like Terraform, Kubernetes, environments, feature flags, etc., you'll be left with the things that are mainly related to monitoring and observability. So one proposal is to rename this operations category to monitoring or observability. That I think the groups in monitor might have more feedback on. So, but that's basically the idea there because as it stands, the operations category is much broader than everything else in the left sidebar. If you think about it, you kind of have operations, and on the other end, you would have development, but everything else in development is kind of broken down. So it would make sense to break down operations as well. So those were like the top three from that one study, and then some of the things coming in from the card sorting data. Do you have any thoughts so far?
Can you go back to your spreadsheet?
Sure.
Yeah. So first thing was operations. In my explorations with playing around with the left nav, operations is such a long menu that it kind of kills the whole accordion because then you have like a double scrolling effect going on with the left nav. So it's good to see that there's some actions to shape some of this stuff up. Yeah, I think if there's key themes around putting those Kubernetes and Terraform into infrastructures, and that's supported by past stuff as well. That sounds like a good move. One thing that this is probably you haven't touched on this point yet, but down at point number like 8, like requirements. So personally, I haven't used requirements in my time at GitLab yet, and when I was trying to like figure out where like just the placement of it on this on the left nav from a visual interaction standpoint, I was just curious. Like, it's not really issues, it's not really thing, and I was curious why you were thinking of putting that under the overview level.
Yeah, so that's another thing. As it currently stands, we don't have a broad planning category. There's just issues. And so it wouldn't be something you would group together with issues, but it is also something that people were tying into general project information, overview of information, customer information, these sort of things in the card sort. So one idea is to potentially move it to the under the just general project overview section, since there may not be a strong case for it being its own top level item at the moment, but that's more of a fuzzy discussion point versus like some of the other ones.
Gotcha. Um, yeah, I have no real qualms around moving stuff. Like you said, I think like groups like the modern group will probably have more feedback on, you know, yes, so be it.
Exactly.
Because yeah, I don't have enough in-depth knowledge in those areas to say left. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so yeah, so there's some similar things like that that we might explore. But another thing to note is that after I've kind of talked to some groups about this, then the step would be to run another tree test with the same tasks that were used in the benchmarking study to kind of see how performance compares. And so if you see a case where performance is better or kind of consistent, then I would feel confident with moving forward with some of these proposed changes. But if we saw that it was worse, then we wouldn't want to move to a worse situation. So then we would kind of throw out some of these proposals. But yes, I just wanted to kind of give an overview of what's in this sheet. I don't think we need to spend the whole time talking about them, but this
Mm-hmm.
is kind of some of the things that are coming up. But there are a couple that I want to pick out from here to think about with you because they relate to my second point. Any thoughts before I do that?
No, jump into it.
Okay, so the first one that I will talk about is this concept that has come up a couple times around pinning most used areas of the left sidebar. I'm not sure if that's something we would prioritize or if that's something that currently makes sense, but basically it's more of feedback that tends to come in sometimes in the SUS survey, for example, or other open-ended surveys where we're kind of talking about this problem of having a lot of features in the left sidebar. Um, and there are certain things that you use more frequently than others, but because our sidebar is kind of catering to all personas, they kind of get lost in all the other items. So some people have requested the ability to pin a frequently used item or something like that. Now, after seeing some of the things you're exploring, it may or may not help with that problem, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that kind of concept.
Yeah. So pinning is an interesting one. If we look at it from a left nav menu, a company that does it really well is Slack with your channels. You know, you can like set up your channels and group them and do all this stuff with it. The difference between us and Slack is that we only have a finite number of things on the left hand side, and yeah, we won't have like hundreds of things on the left nav, or at least I hope we don't, because then that's just wild. Um, so that being said, I think there is another issue around like starring pages within GitLab and things like that. So maybe it goes hand in hand, and then there's like a menu item on the left side that's like a starred. So these like your starred pages, and then that kind of lists your starred pages. But yeah, I think rearranging the left nav could just come from another issue that we're like that we created a few months ago around what the team is focused on around enabling features, but potentially separating enabling features with hiding visibility of the left nav items in the left nav versus turning off the feature completely. So like right now they're kind of commingled into like one checkbox, and that causes some issues on what's happening with our GitLab instance is not running properly, or I can't see something that I need because we disable the feature to hide the feature, but you might need the feature in some other instance. So perhaps that this could be solved just from a cleaner execution of the visibility of the different menu items.
Yeah, that's a good point because I was also wondering that as well because those comments are coming from our existing state where, aside from, I think the things you were able to disable before we added more of the security and operations and analytics things, you can't take them away. So it would make sense why people are kind of like, there's something I always go back to and I just want to quickly go to that thing. So I think we might resolve some of that with some of the work we're already doing, but I also like what you're talking about, starring pages. That might also be an interesting concept.
Yeah, but with starring pages, I think that's going to be a much, much bigger effort. So,
Yeah.
if we're looking for like an MVC kind of path, yeah, I think that's probably we should have that as a separate conversation.
All right. Sounds good. And then another thing was the concept of, hold on, let me check my little sheet very quickly. I always get this toolbar in the way. I don't know if you deal with that as well, but it drives me a little crazy
Oh,
sometimes.
the Zoom one.
Yeah, the Zoom toolbar.
Oh, yeah.
Another one, yes, so I have one on here about investigating usage data for locked files, but this isn't just specific to locked files, even though I said that. But this ties in more to my second point on the agenda, where I was starting to do an audit of the content that's in the left sidebar, and I basically have found we have like an abundance of list views, list pages, and things like that, even beyond the ones that we explicitly call list. So, for example, with files, obviously you have your file list, which makes sense, but you also have locked files, which which is basically a list of files that are locked. But if you lock a file in this view, let's do a little thing. If you lock a file in this view, there will also be an indicator that the file is locked.
Gotcha.
And then it shows up here. So I don't know what the solution is, but it just seems like with something like this, and that's why I want to investigate the usage data. I'm not sure if this is the most important item that could live here, for example, because you can access this information in the files view as well. But I just wanted your thought on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with this, but I am assuming is like if you have more than 6 files in your repo and you wanted to see all the log files, you don't want to be traversing and navigating through each directory to like find your log
Yeah.
files. You just like want to get a view of that. Yeah, so I think whoever group is responsible for that, and they can probably give you more insights on the edge cases of log files.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. And it's interesting because I guess what I'm thinking of is this pattern of having a list of them here, but then in some cases we'll have, like with the issue list, you could filter for certain things, or you could see kind of in tabs the information about like what is closed, what is open, I guess the states. So I was trying to see with
I see.
you, do you see a similarity here with, I guess, the states of a file, or are these kind of separate things to you?
Yeah, I think there's a case to make like lists of things look similar or have similar functionalities, as in whatever that may be. But I think the repository files list is very different, and it's almost like a tree thing. It's not like a normal
Yeah, that's
list per se.
true.
And I think if you change that up too much, then people will lose their minds, because that's
Yeah,
that's kind of like the core of like a code repository, is to see a listing of code. And then
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I guess you could say that like you could also have like a toggle here and like show me the locked files, and then you have one view to see them all. So
Yeah, yeah, it's just this interesting thing with the locked files type of list. I'm not sure what word I want to call it. And a similar thing with tags. You can
mm-hmm.
filter the tags.
Hmm.
But then there are some things like in settings. For example,
Mm-hmm.
in settings, you'll have some of these list views as well,
Mm-hmm.
where you've kind of interacted with something in some way, and then you just see the list of all those changes. Like, let me
Yep.
find an example.
Sure.
Not necessarily integrations, but kind of something like this, where you have these views of integrations, and you have the views of after you add a webhook or you add a deploy token, you'll see a list of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm just kind of wondering if this is something to consider as well. Um, the different types of list views that we have linking up from the sidebar. But yeah, so that's one thought. What's another
So
example
just
of
for
a weird one?
clarity, is it like a visual thing that you're asking about, or is it as in the look and feel of that
It's
locked file
more of
list?
it's more of the, and that's why I say it's like not a concrete thing, because I would want to
Mm.
see like the usage data, for example. But if
Mm-hmm.
it's more of a question about the priority of having certain list views in linking from the left sidebar versus accessible from another point in like the user journey, for
Mm.
example.
Mm.
But like you can say with certain ones like this has a clear like action you're taking as well.
Mm-hmm.
Branches, you have a similar thing where there's an action to take, but
Mm-hmm.
there's also kind of like the states and everything.
Mm.
They're not the same content, but I'm wondering if they can somehow interact in a way where they don't necessarily have to be entirely separate list views, because we have a bunch of them basically.
Mm. Okay.
It's more of a food for thought sort of thing.
Yeah. And is the goal to like reduce the number of items on the left side, to reduce complexity, or
So I would say the goal is to basically evaluate the usefulness of some of the things in the left sidebar,
mm.
or the frequency of use of them. And if they're not the most frequently needed, you might swap in something else. Or you might
Right.
just keep it simple and reduce items. It could be either way. Um, but yeah,
Right.
this is more of an interesting thing that came to mind as I started to click through all of the different types of content that we have in here.
Mm-hmm.
And
Cool. Thanks for that clarification.
yeah, you're welcome. Another one, so the last one that I'll talk about was like, for example, with on-demand scans, there was an interesting flow going on here where it almost reminded me of a settings page. Like some of the patterns reminded me of what I would see in the settings and configuration areas, but you click on manage dash scans and it takes you to the configuration section,
Mm-hmm.
which will show you kind of a list of what you have created.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you click on new, then you can click on new dash scan, but it takes you like right back here. So it was just like this interesting thing that I saw here, and I wasn't too sure what was happening. But yeah, with this one, I just thought it was interesting because it made me think. I think maybe each group might want to take a look at some of the content that is under their individual sections, because I don't necessarily think this is something that me and you would work on for every
Hmm.
section, but
Hmm.
there just might be some things that could either be simplified or combined or things like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like spring is coming, so it's like a spring cleaning thing. Like, so maybe we can create an epic around like revisit
Yeah.
all your menu items as part of the left nav cleanup, and consider removing some or combining some or something like that. But yes, definitely we're not the right people to make that call because
Yeah.
we don't know the details of each team's full vision or where they really want to go. So I think we'll leave it to them to handle that.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so that is it for now. Just wanted to give you some thoughts into some of the things I'm thinking about right now.
Okay, so with your findings of some of the new groupings and things like that, the next steps on that, would that be talking to this with the specific groups responsible for those areas to like get the green light
Yeah.
and then work that through, or is there yeah, from an action item perspective, what were we thinking here?
Yeah, so basically the first three, oh no, the first two already have issues associated with them. And so the next steps will be for me to create issues for the rest of them and then to loop in the relevant groups to kind of discuss why the change is being proposed and then kind of have them discuss that as well. And then I think we probably have an epic that just contains all these proposed changes to the left sidebar. And then we'll
Gotcha.
also want to run that last, well, not the last, but that following tree test to kind of see how they all work together and be able to compare it with the benchmarking um, success rates, for example.
Hmm. Okay, cool. I think that sounds good. All right, so I'll jump into my world.
Sure.
So at the moment, our group was so I was responsible for filling out the epic around consolidating the top menu. So that's this menu here, the groups, projects, more, kind of combining that into one. One thing that was brought up a long time ago by other designers was, "Hey, Michael, what does this look like on mobile?" And I said, "Yeah, that's easy. I'll solve that later." But it's never easy as it seems. So this is what our mobile menu looks like right now. So projects, more, and then we have this other secondary menu that like opens here, and then we have more lovely things inside each of these things. So the first thing I wanted to focus on was some of the designs here, and thank you for all the feedback from like Austin and Nick and Vitika on some of these designs so far. And yeah, let's jump into some of this stuff. So if we just look at consolidating the menu, oh,
Are
I'm
you
not sharing my screen.
sharing? Okay.
Yeah, that's terrible. Oh, yeah, that would help. Sure. Yeah, let's go back to this. So, yeah, like I said, this is what we're trying to consolidate: projects, groups, and more. And then on mobile, we have them as drop-down menus like this. And the challenging part with this is that what we're introducing with the flyout menus, like we have essentially two lists, like a primary list of these high-level objects and potentially recently visited links on the side. So imagine combining this list with this list together all in one. And on mobile, we also have this more menu that exposes the notifications and user menus and add more. So right now, our mobile menu is pretty complicated, in my opinion, because there's a lot of things that you need to review to see. So this week was looking at like cleaning that up. So the first step is consolidating the menu into one. And then that opens up the door for like projects, groups, more so as a list. And then if you click through this, you're taken to projects. Um, so that's like earlier executions with, and then there was questions around what does this X do with the search GitLab? So we kind of went through a little exploration there. Um, search right now itself takes you to a separate search page. So for the time being, rather than trying to create an inline search area in here, we're probably going to do the same thing where search will just, let me see if I have, no, I don't have a shot of that, but why is it slow? What are these designs? I'm just gonna go to Figma. So instead of having a search box at the top, this is a concept where you click on the search and that will take you to search. And that kind of sets up the foundation to say, if we do want to introduce inline search on the page itself, that we could introduce it something like this. And then one of the comments from someone else is, we cleaned up the top area a lot. And at the moment, you have to review the secondary menu to see the notifications. So would it be useful to show notifications at the headers all the time for a mobile view? So you open up GitLab, you would see these things at the top, rather than having it nested inside this menu here. So then that cleans up this menu to be more like a pure menu, and having the notifications at the top. And Nick came through with like an idea around this, where you click on the menu and then that pops up your menu and you have your user menu and everything there. So how that all could potentially look like is something like this, where at the moment the user menu would be like a file, another menu. Austin suggested perhaps keeping a similar pattern or listing all the items there. So what that could look like is you have your user stuff down here. Clicking on that would open up another panel here that slides in a note, just like these panels here. So this is where I'm at with the mobile menu. The question I have for you is like, this is a drastic change from what we have right now, but I think it's a big improvement from where we're at right now. And how do we measure this? Because it feels like there's a lot of changes here. So with the scope of a lot of changes, I can see this happening in multiple issues, but grand scheme things, it's like, like how do we say this thing is good if we don't already have established jobs to be done or kind of scenarios around mobile? Or is this an opportunity to establish those things?
Yeah, I think I would see this more of it as an opportunity to establish those things because historically, from what I know, we haven't done much research for mobile in general, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how often we design specifically for mobile, or I don't really know the flow for that, but
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't been very common on the research side, if at
Mm-hmm.
all. But for example, I know that we in the SUS surveys we previously were asking some questions around were people interested in using GitLab on mobile. So the first time we ever asked it, we asked, how often do you use GitLab on mobile or something like that? And it
Mm-hmm.
was the majority of people were saying like less than 20% of the time. But what we found is that when we started to ask how important is it to use mobile, more people were saying that it was important to them. So there was kind of a mismatch there. They
Mm.
weren't presently using it very often, but they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't dive further into mobile research, but
Mm-hmm.
what we were kind of thinking at the time was that it might be the experience that's preventing them from using it as often as they want to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we did get a sense of some of the things that they wanted to do on mobile, and it was mainly related to CI/CD things, so checking in on pipelines,
Mm-hmm.
merge requests, and
Mm-hmm.
issues. Those were like the top three things that people were mentioning in the SUS survey.
Mm-hmm.
So what comes to mind immediately is that I like this idea of revealing the icons and notifications and making them present without having to go to the second level, because these are things that, at least from this survey, that people were saying they wanted to do on mobile. So things
Mm-hmm.
they needed to be accessible. But yeah, so back to the topic of measuring the success, I think there could be two ways. Um, but in order to measure a navigation change, you definitely would want to establish some type of baseline.
Mm-hmm.
So baseline, maybe even a baseline usability test, like just a
Mm.
usability test of the existing experience, and then versus this proposed one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we also have a survey, an overall navigation success survey that we're starting to run. As of last quarter, we kicked it off. And so we'll be doing that quarterly. So we might also add some questions about mobile to that survey just to
Mm-hmm.
see how the responses start to evolve over time, like before this is implemented and
Mm.
in the following quarters. So that's
Yeah.
also an option. The overall approach, and then the more specific approach where you're testing, I don't know, some main because there is a lot changing. It's actually kind of like all changing all at once. So I don't know if there's a main hypothesis or anything, but that
Yeah.
would be something to test in between the existing versus the proposed version.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about this out loud here, it feels like what we could do is actually run two unmoderated usability tests um, at the same time. One that has just like the old flows, and then one with the new flows, and then do them in parallel with different sets of people, and then you kind of get your results like a guideline from there.
Yeah, and I think that might be the way to go here,
Mm.
because it could be tricky with
Yeah.
mobile, because we don't, at least presently, don't dedicate a lot of research time to it. And I'm
Mm.
not sure about engineering and design time in terms of what's the priority, but
Hmm.
yeah, that might be the simplest approach.
Yeah. Because at the moment, like part of me feels like I'm pretty confident about these changes. It feels like, yeah, this is one of those moments like I'll be surprised if there's difficulties versus like where someone prefers the old one over this one. But yeah, I think that's why we should do those tests because there might be some things I'm not seeing. But
Yeah, exactly. Um, oh, another thing. This is a
mm,
kind of a side note, but there's this one issue about making issues, like being able to click on issues from the project overview or something like that. I'm not sure
mhm.
if that is resolved here
No,
or if
it's
that's
not
still
resolved
relevant,
here.
but
Yeah,
that
that's
could
still
also.
relevant because if we jump into an area, so where what we're talking about here is like this is the project overview page and we have in details people want somewhere in here to jump to issues, even though issues is here, but somewhere here or somewhere there's something to consider because competitor products would have a link to issues really prominent on the page, but maybe this is not prominent enough. But other ideas is like reorganizing this so that issues that are assigned to me or something, because this is the overview page. It should help. This, I think, would be a good area to introduce workflow-based links on the page, because it's essentially an overview with like the same view as, the files down here. So there's an opportunity to think about workflow navigation once you land on the project overview. So I don't think it's jumping to the main issues, but potentially like issues assigned to me or issues I've created, like this stuff is hidden in this search. Pop, move it into like this main area. Seems like it could be a good area for solving that. But no, today's conversation doesn't touch on that yet.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I would say the simplest we can do is to at least kind of measure the current existent against this proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And then we might be able to think of how we can do a high level measurement over time, just by adding some mobile questions to that navigation survey.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel like that might be, yeah, I'm trying to think of, in terms of priorities and everything, I feel like that might be the simplest way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this is really cool. Like I said, I'm not sure how often we go this we do like a redesign or a full thing for mobile, but it's really cool to see this
Mm-hmm.
this refreshing of mobile.
Yeah. Okay. So jumping away from mobile and jumping back into the left nav world. So one of the issues that is in my radar is this interaction pattern that we have around clicking on the first item, whether that takes you to a landing page or it is itself its landing page. So for example, here, what I'm talking about is clicking on issues actually takes you or highlights the first item, which is list. And perhaps it should always have like the first thing clickable, and then that opens up the page. And there's like issues with this when it's collapsed, in the sense that this is clickable and this is clickable, so both of these are clickable. So it's like choose one, like make a choice, like, but we don't do that. We allow people to click both because there's no separation really between the two. So essentially there's three ways to click there. Project overview is another one. So if you click on details, it's the same thing as clicking on an overview, same thing as clicking on the homepage. So we have three ways to click to this page. It is, you want to make sure you get there, I guess. But that aside,
Exactly.
so yeah, that's a little bit of me being snarky there. But yeah.
You can't miss the details page. That's also known as the overview. And also the homepage.
Yeah. So I was experimenting with like what that could look like from an interaction standpoint. If the first thing was the thing that was clickable. Once again, to like CI/CD, life gets a little bit complicated because at the moment they don't really have like a landing page, and potentially that's one of those areas that we will work with the other groups to like create a landing page. Security and compliance, operations was where, to your point earlier, there's a lot of things in there, and if we start adding stuff like settings and things like that, the list would just get longer and longer. And what happens here with like operations is, like, in the current menu with a 1024 height screen, you're already pushing down two other options down. So then you have like scrolling on the left nav and everything, and package registries. Yeah. See if we can move value stream up, wiki snippets, and then settings. Settings is another one where it could get bigger over time. And then, more scrolling. So I was looking at this, and I was like, we also had the collapse view. So that's just like the collapse version of this. And then I was looking at the idea of potentially combining the two. So how I got here, I see you on the page. So security operations is where life gets kind of crazy. But if we combine the two and we have the left nav where we had the collapse things with the selected state, and we have a heading to show where you're at right now and the different menu items underneath, this is taking the same amount of horizontal space as this menu. But looking at the two, I feel that this one has more focus because at the moment you're in operations, so you have everything related to operations. You don't have words like repository and issues kind of like cluttering your space. And it holds up when you're like looking across. So whether we have another kind of area or longer areas or shorter areas, you can still surface a lot of information here without changing the view on this side. So if you click on issues, that pushes everything down at the moment. So I feel like there's a consistency around this kind of layout. And yeah, like why do I need to see all these other things? I think it's helpful for first-time users to understand like, oh, this is repositories issues, merge requests, because icon association is potentially, yeah, these are not the most obvious icons for newbies. But like once you get familiar, the hypothesis, like, yeah, you know what's going on, or on the hover state, you can see. Yeah. So for example, if you hovered over CI/CD, you would see the heading. This wouldn't be clickable, but these items under here would be clickable. Because I think there's some value in our current menu where you can hover, right click, open in a new window. And I think that's
Yeah,
something
I
that
agree.
I think should be kept. But this is a way that we could surface that. So from here, I saw that we have project overview. Clicking on this will probably take you to project overview, but I'm not a huge fan of the way this lockup works, nor the clicking pattern. So if I remove that, we get into this kind of state where we have home at the top, which is makes sense. And we have one click to get to whatever the project overview might be. And that leaves like this thing. So breadcrumbs and like project switching. And in a, what's this? Oh yeah, in previous explorations, we were like toying with like showing the project name up here if you selected a specific project. But we found out that this doesn't hold up very well if you switch into like milestones or activity where they don't have projects associated with them. So we parked that for a while, and then we did usability testing on this idea of having some kind of switcher inside this context, and people loved this. But I didn't like it because it felt the visual execution of it feels wrong to me. It's like a breadcrumb, but not a breadcrumb, and there's duplication of information here. So yeah, that was confusing for me. So I parked that and created a separate issue to revisit that. That being said, I landed upon this issue when I was looking at mobile. So if you landed on both of these issue pages, can you tell me, like, one of them is a project page and one of them is a group page? You don't know. Like if you worked here for a long time, you might know that if you see one, then
Yeah.
that's a group. If you see two, then that's a project. But yeah, if you're in a rush or you know, how do you know? You just don't know. So that's when I thought about signposting as a way to like whatever area of the product that you're selected up here, and potentially combining the idea of a project dropdown with breadcrumbs together. And so this way you still have that way to navigate, but then here you can switch your projects at this level to switch to view like merge requests of a different project as well. Execution wise, like it feels okay to me. There's and this is probably something that I'm going to get more feedback on, but I try to see other pages to see if this pattern holds up. And if you look at side by side the security dashboard page itself, like the left nav already looks to me simplified because you don't have so many links on the left, but it takes up the
Right.
same amount of space. So, and it has the same kind of interaction. So like life feels okay. The only area
It,
that's interesting is like this, like how would that be received by people? And what does that look like when you like scroll up and down? Like, is it only the breadcrumb that's visible, or whatever logic we have for sticky headers? That's to be determined. Yeah, do you have any comments on this?
yeah, I was thinking the same thing about the top breadcrumb area. That that might be the one that, at least that one's the part that's a little bit weird for me right
Mm-hmm.
now, but I probably would get used to it. But
Mm-hmm.
this sidebar thing, I just realized what it reminds me of a little bit. Slightly reminds me of the web ID, kind of,
Kind of.
in a way. But
Yeah.
do you know which part I'm talking about, where you
Yeah.
have
So
like,
you have like the files, reviews, and changes. So you have the right hand in the, based on whenever you click, that content on that next area changes.
yeah, I I like this. I like it.
And
It
like pages, like milestones. This is where the signposting comes in handy because if you were on the milestone page, it would look like this. There is no left nav for a milestone page. But clicking into a milestone, it actually doesn't stay in the world of milestones. It takes you actually to like groups, and specifically milestones within issues in groups at a group object level. But if we do that currently today, it's hard to see. So if I click on milestones and I look up 13.9, which is an upcoming or like today. So if I click on this one, so I'm in here. But like I was stuck this morning because I didn't know that like it's part of this milestones. Like,
oh you did. Yep,
yeah,
it's a Easter egg hunt every
yeah.
day.
So I found out. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's how potentially this could work from this navigation. So this thing at the top tells you that you kind of switched worlds per se. Um, but, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's
Yeah. So how this would look with project switching is if you're like looking at a merge request, then like opening this would allow you to switch to a recently visited project. Same thing with here for groups. So if you wanted to see different milestones, that's potentially how this project switching thing could work.
yeah. So with these two together, the top nav bar is just telling you where you are, like what,
Mm-hmm.
I guess,
What world of
level,
GitLab
or
you're in?
yeah.
Yeah.
But you're not necessarily navigating through the top nav bar item,
And this
or
one?
you can still click on it and see that whole
Yeah.
list of
Yeah.
everything.
You
Oh,
can still see that. Yeah. Like if I was going to break this down into MPICs and stuff, I would actually say that the things that I feel confident in moving ahead with would be the left nav itself. This thing is probably like the biggest questionable thing. So this can just go away for now. And then we keep our existing breadcrumb. And then the only thing that we're missing is like some kind of way to say potentially something like that. Where the, like that's how I would approach like this from an iteration standpoint, that And we have this guy is probably small. Yeah. So then you have a familiarity of how the look and feel of your left nav would look. Home is kind of project overview is like clicking on this. The left nav gets cleaned up like this, top nav, and then this page here, this area here remains untouched until we do some more validation around introducing this as a switcher.
This is really cool. This left sidebar, personally, I like it. I like it a lot personally. It it just makes it simpler for me when I'm looking at one thing and not thinking about everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm trying
That's
to think
probably something
of where
cool.
else I've interacted with a sidebar like that. Probably maybe a lot of places, but
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Yeah. So I think this kind of shows it off pretty well, like the difference between the two.
Right. And so you can collapse all of it into just the icons, or
Yep.
all of it entirely.
I think it behaves the same way as this.
Okay.
It gets collapsed. And by having the headers not clickable, then we kind of avoid this scenario, and then we just make these things clickable. And then we kind of solve that interaction problem as well.
Yeah.
And on
I like it.
mobile, it's this. Yeah.
And so with with making the headers not clickable, does that mean the first item of each section is the landing page rather than
Yep.
the header leading to a landing page?
Yeah. So moving forward with this, yeah. So if you hover over this, then you'll see the pop up kind of like this though. You still see something like this. If you click on the thing directly, it behaves like how it does right now, where it will land you on the first page. Yeah. But yeah, this kind of pattern would say that the first item is the first page you land on.
Wow, this is super interesting, and probably your mind is like spinning with all all of these things that you're doing. Super cool.
Yeah. So my head is spinning in the sense that I want to push forward with this change, because I feel like the cool thing is it takes up the same amount of space as this nav. But
Yeah, that is what's
and then
really
you're like,
interesting about it, is that it takes the same amount of space, but where is that where is that space coming from? I'm trying to like look at the existing one and I'm like, is it just around, where is it? What is it? I guess the spacing around the words once it's expanded.
yeah. So essentially, you have like, if you draw a line down here,
Ah, yes.
so that's your collapsed area, right?
Ah.
And then you have this area to be your menu. So then you see all this like white gap over here. You kind of like move it over. So
Yeah.
longer lists, yeah, it's gonna wrap. So package and registries would also kind of be like security and compliance, where you would have to wrap because you have less space. Like you can't do this because you'll probably get too close to the sides with like margins and stuff to give it some space. But
You have an example with the badges. Are these badges?
oh,
With
the
the issue
numbers.
counts, the issue and merge request
Hmm.
counts.
No, not yet. Not yet. But in the world of Web IDE, we introduced the numbers on the top of the sidebar. So I'm thinking of reusing that kind of execution over here where you have the numbers there. Where this kind of gets interesting is when you have numbers that are in like 36,000, you know. But I think we follow whatever patterns we have for badges there. But that's a good point. Like, how does that look, and where does that fall in? So, would that number be at this level where we have all or lists or whatever we call it? Would that number be in there, or would it be? Will we have separate numbers down here as well? So, good questions, Catherine.
I guess that's one thing that pops out to me, and but yeah, it's only issues and merge requests at the moment that we'd have to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And the merge request nav item becomes even weirder here. But I see that you're thinking to fill it up with some of the
You read my mind exactly what I was doing there.
and the settings, but yeah, it's like it would just be empty otherwise, because right now it doesn't even have like a list item or anything. That's interesting. And I guess the same would be, well, if we don't move requirements, because it was proposed to potentially move it, but if we didn't move requirements, there might be the same thing there.
Yeah. So in those scenarios,
And snippets and wiki.
yeah, single page views.
Single page views.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking for settings for those things. Yeah, it's kind of a weird kind of execution where you have so much space but nothing.
But at the same time, maybe there's just, yeah, things specific to those pages. Like I think in Confluence, you get more granular stuff than you have in GitLab because it's like focused on the wiki. So there might be a similar thing where you surface items and actions related to these single page things.
The wiki is interesting because wiki could, like, there's different things that you could surface there, like the menu on the side maybe goes on the left hand side. Like, these are just kind of crazy ideas, but I'm thinking on the spot. But yeah, the sad page, like requirements, that's just the single thing. So that could just operate like a list, I think. So if I go to requirements, because it's only a list page, it could have the title requirements at the top and doesn't have a left nav. So it just has, instead of, it's like in the collapse state, and it has the title kind of like security dashboard or like milestones, where it has like one of these headings at the top because it's only the one thing. But yeah, let me play around with that and create a clickable prototype so that we can kick the tires and see how this feels for those pages in context of areas with long lists, and see if that's distracting or it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for showing me this. This is really awesome. I am excited to see where it may go. And I just like this. I like this focus thing. Maybe I'm biased now, but I personally like it a lot because it does that like focus mode, as you're saying, and it doesn't have the problem of not being easy to get back to other places, which when the web IDE first was like moving into that, some people were saying, oh, I don't know how to get back to my project or things like that, or it feels like I've left the context of everything else in a bad way. But so as they started to add more things where you can like click on a merge request or you could click to get back to the project, then it started to improve that sentiment. So I like here that there's still a way to get back to everything, even with this focus mode.
So what I'm thinking with this is that this is actually like a combination of all the latest solution validations that I've done so far, like the top nav, the navigating to like merge request settings and switching between projects and issues. That this could use the same task as the past, but in this new context, and seeing how users deal with that. So that's what I'm thinking of to validate or to sense check this stuff.
Yeah, I would definitely. Yeah, I think using the same tasks, and if there are some others that might enable them to run across other scenarios that might bring up some of the things that we're not sure of, or that would be
Mm.
good too. I don't know if there's anything that immediately comes to mind, but there could be some that test certain things that we're less confident about.
Mhm. For me, it was more like there's things that tested really well, but I didn't like the execution. So and that's where I'm coming from.
Which is which is funny. It's like
Yeah.
everyone's like, "Yes, this is great." And you're like, "Well, I mean,
Yes,
I know
exactly.
I created this thing, but I'm not even sure. Are you sure that you like it?" And they're like, "Yeah, I love it." You're like, "Why?" No, but I get what you think about it as well, because it could be a little bit weird. It could be very useful, but it could also be kind of like strange to see it like
Mm.
that because it's so different. But I don't. We'll see.
All right. Yeah, so that's my kind of question. Oh, I guess I think that's it for the recording, so I'm just gonna stop it here.